You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
The intent of the company was to begin to tackle the issue of how to connect and provide internet access to people outside of the main urban areas of the country. How do you get from, let's say, the core of a network to the actual customer? It's great what the telcos have done in terms of being able to send a text, to make a call, and there's a lot to be said for that. But to go to the next level of productivity, these things need true broadband, and this is still a huge void in the developing world.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest. We have Diseye Isoun, who is a broadband and ICT expert who is instrumental in establishing key institutions within the Nigerian Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy, including Galaxy Backbone, NITDA, and Nigcomsat. Welcome to the podcast, Diseye. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
You're going to have to bear with me today because I've actually just come back from New York. I came back first thing this morning and straight to the podcast. So I was there for 3 days, and I think jet lag is catching up with me. But really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a conversation I've been looking forward to, something I think is very timely and much needed.
Yeah.
Whether it's Nigeria or the continent as a whole. So as we get started, introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Diseye.
Yes, no, thanks. And thanks for having me. We had a company we put together and started back in 2002. And the intent of the company was to begin to tackle the issue of how to connect and provide internet access to people outside of the main urban areas of the country at a time when Nigeria had just liberalized its telecom sector. And there was a lot of excitement and opportunity around that. And MTN, to give them credit, took a kind of risk and bought one of the first universal access licenses under that liberalized regime. And of course, focused their efforts to begin in the big cities. So the whole idea was, how do you ensure that over time, regardless of where you are, and to also try to prevent this sort of flight to the cities from everywhere that ends up creating overburdened infrastructure and cities and people who don't really have a reason or a means to be there, ending up being more of a liability than an asset. So to the extent that people can stay put, so to speak, but have a good internet connection, that is a goal that's was worth pursuing, we thought.
Thank you. So you've given us a nice overview there of the company that you started and how it was focused on improving connectivity, not just in the major cities, but in areas outside of the major cities where connectivity was lacking. So with the work that you've done over the years, how have you seen the broadband landscape develop over the last 5 years, say in Nigeria, in relation to connectivity outside of the major cities?
Yes, I think it's interesting. I'd like to give this example that in the developed countries, as they like to call them, your internet connection at home or at your business, etc., is provided 85% by ISPs, as they're called, traditional internet service providers. That could be in the West, that tends to be like a Comcast or a Virgin or a BT. And 15% is coming in terms of internet throughput through the telcos, the mobile telcos. That's more like in the West, the AT&Ts of the world, the Virgins, etc. the O2s. And in the less developed countries, it's the opposite, where 85% of the connectivity comes through people's mobile phones, and only 15, even much less actually, only less than 5% comes from traditional ISPs. And this ultimately is not sustainable. It's great what the telcos have done in terms of being able to send a text, to make a call, or say my goods are on the way, through WhatsApp. And there's a lot to be said for that. But to go to the next level of productivity or entertainment or personal fulfillment or innovation, working with software on your laptop, going to school, these things need true broadband, and this is still a huge void in the developing world, and it's an opportunity, and it's a bit of my position that it's an opportunity that the mobile companies are not necessarily best positioned to solve, and that is a kind of the puzzle that countries like Nigeria, but like I always like to say, any country that has folks with low purchasing power, infrastructure challenges, be it lights, water, roads, and restiveness, be it some security concerns or challenges. And if you take those three things, for better or for worse, we're actually talking about 70% of the world. So, these areas have these challenges, and it will take some outside the box thinking to solve those problems. Although there's a lot going for us in the last few years.
You touched on a very interesting point. In Africa, over 80% of internet connectivity comes from telcos and not ISPs. With that in mind, what do you see or believe the role of local ISPs is in bridging the digital divide?
I think there's a couple ways, but maybe a simple way to see it is that if your phone, if you're trying to get on the internet on your phone and browse, as you're on the move, and for some reason you can't get on the internet, you don't call anybody, ironically, right? So think about it. You just say, well, I must be in sort of a blank spot, or maybe the network is down for a minute. I'll just wait, right? It's only if you're down for a good chunk of time you might do that. So, but if you have your internet down at home, and you're down for a period, there's a phone call you can make or an email you can send, or someone proactively reaches you. And so one of the big differences is an ISP has, as simple as it sounds, a support layer. It has a layer to which, because when you have a connection in your school or at home or in a university or in your small business, you tend to need a kind of more of a handhold. It's more of a touch and feel. And so, in the developed countries, these tend to be very large companies, who are ISPs. But I think my vision and my little experience is that in Africa, our solution may be to have sort of small regional ISPs who can do that touch and feel layer and provide the service. Obviously, there'll be big infrastructure. There may be big infrastructure folks behind, like the Starlinks of the world or whatever might be playing out. But you need these local folks who know the ground, know how it works, in the informal sector, know addresses that are not necessarily formalized the way they are in other places, and this sort of ground knowledge that is more important, I think, in our world. I think is why I think we need these ISPs are required, but they're not going to be necessarily huge entities, but rather perhaps regional or even micro players, let's call them.
Yeah, the solution would be to have smaller regional ISPs. So can these local ISPs compete with global satellite providers, as you touched on, the likes of Starlink, or should they be carving out their own niche within that space?
Yeah, so this is the quandary and the place where statistics can lie if you're not careful. So big headlines are that Starlink is now the third biggest ISP in Nigeria, for example. All right. Now, they're the third biggest ISP in the small pond of ISPs, but they're still, the third biggest ISP of 5% of the market. So what I foresee is that Starlink, for example, would partner with local ISPs who will find ingenious ways to get their products to places it never will get to if Starlink sits, in the sky and in the West and is providing a service. And Starlink will only grow to a certain sort of cap, max, based on the challenges I said. One, how many Africans can afford to pay down payments, $400, $500 before passing go, and then, paying their $40, $50 a month. The statistics show that only 2% of 3% of Nigerians make $500 in a month. And I don't think they're going to give that monthly salary to Starlink. So if and when they really want to penetrate the markets in a major way, there have to be ingenious ways to cut down that cost. And I have some ideas around how local ISPs can do that, partnering with Starlink. So it's not an either or, but it's a sort of working together.
Yeah, so a collaborative effort. So keeping on the theme of Starlink, from your perspective or opinion, do you think satellite internet will be the future of broadband inclusion in Africa, or would we see more of a mix of different solutions or options?
Yes, it depends slightly on the direction of policymakers and governments, both in terms of giving licenses and access, but also in terms of where investment monies are spent. Will we spend a lot of money on fiber as opposed to what I like to call last mile solutions that will empower ISPs? There's a fair amount of question marks there. And also, will the Starlinks and the Amazon Kuipers, which is the Starlink competitor that is around the corner in the next couple of years, will these folks, will they genuinely have an interest in having deep penetration of business in Africa? I mean, they will do very well just connecting rural citizens in rich countries. They will do very well connecting a person in Finland that lives in the middle of nowhere, an American who lives, in very remote locations, well-to-do people in developed countries, including Nigeria. They will be able to get that business, and there's a good argument to say that will be good enough for them. They may decide they don't need to bother themselves, quite bluntly, with connecting the next 2 million Nigerians they could connect if they really got their hands dirty and worked with Nigerians and had more of a presence on the ground. And so that's the big question, will they, quite bluntly, will they bother? And it always looks good for the marketing to show, a satellite dish on the top of an African school. But many times that's done, but in reality, that is not actually what plays out. So lots of questions on how things will actually evolve.
You quickly touched on something interesting there, which I'd like to go back to in terms of last mile solutions. So from a internet connectivity perspective, could you give us a brief overview of what is last mile solutions?
Yeah, so your last mile means how do you get from, let's say, not to get too technical, but how do you get from the the core of a network to the actual customer. Now, that could be fiber that runs all the way into your house. It could be a legacy telephone line, or it could be a kind of wireless connection through the telcos. The telcos buy frequency, which is very expensive, and then only them can use those wireless frequencies. You take the fiber. It's very expensive to run fiber to a home, and in Africa, it's unrealistic for 95% of the populace. So that's not very interesting, at least on the short term. And then you have the mobile operators who have all this expensive spectrum, as it's called, as a way to get to your phone or to get to your house wirelessly. And that's also a very expensive venture. But there are other ways in which you can connect people through less expensive last mile solutions, wireless solutions. And there are ways that this can be done, but it does taking on policymakers, the regulators in countries, to say, if we really want people to get connected, we have to be able to ensure that there are affordable ways for the last mile to be achieved. I think this is, if there's one thing I leave out of what I just said, is there are affordable ways for the last mile to be achieved, but there are a lot of interests, quite bluntly, that will not necessarily fall in line with that. It has to be something that is driven by policy and by a belief that people should be connected.
So if we look at the current last mile solutions that are provided by telcos, does the current telco business model in Nigeria, do you believe it serves the majority or it just serves a few?
It's great, and I think this is important to say, even though I think I'm repeating myself, but it is what the telcos do in terms of connecting people through voice calls, basic WhatsApps, texts, it has been disruptive in a positive way for the world and Africa. But they are not built, they are not companies that are structured to provide internet and broadband to millions of people, because they are not structured to give that level of support, one. And two, their technology only pays for itself for the most part in highly dense areas. There are exceptions, but especially in Africa, you need X amount of people around your base station, let's say around the 3-kilometer area of your base station, to make it worth putting that investment in. And so for not by any fault of theirs or any big conspiracy, but just because of the economics of it, they are not structured to ensure that broadband gets to the populace. They will get a lot of people connected in the cities. There's an interesting thing going on now with MTN, where they are actually putting a lot of investment in fiber to the home in the big cities, like in Abuja and Lagos.
Yes.
And you wonder, why would a mobile operator be putting money into fiber to connect just a few rich Nigerians? Well, it's because they've done the math, and ultimately for them, that's a better way, or one of the ways in which they can expand their revenue, not by necessarily trying to connect people in rural areas. So I think that's a good example of what I'm describing.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Earlier, you indicated that change will likely only come through government policy or intervention. So what kind of supportive policies from government will drive better broadband penetration in underserved areas?
Well, it would be things like incenting foreign direct investment and local investment, in saying, we will provide you perhaps subsidies or subsidized cost of last mile frequencies as an incentive to connect places where are currently underserved. And there is an agency called the Universal Service Provision Fund. Almost all countries have some kind of fund like that. There's typically a portion of the income of telcos is levied. In Nigeria, it's 2.5% of the income of telcos is taken by the government and put in a pool. And this kind of fund could be the basis to which, at least the starting point to which this kind of thing could be done. And again, there are some attempts to use that fund to improve broadband penetration, but I think the way in which those funds are used is critical, and I think that's the type of thing that one could look at. And the game that the others play is saying, everything has to be competitive and open and free markets. It's a kind of classic argument, but at the same time, if and when those free markets are not achieving certain goals, you have to be open to some exceptions to ensure folks are connected, to the internet in this day and age.
Fantastic. And I know over the years you've done a lot of research in terms of some of the innovations and feasibility of wider internet access and penetration. So I wanted to just take this in a bit of a different direction in terms of some of the benefits or value that wider internet access can bring. So from the research and the insights that you've gathered over the years, how have you seen or forecasted how improved broadband connectivity can drive, say, economic growth within certain markets such as Nigeria?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of statistics around increase in GDP for increase in broadband penetration. But I'm not a huge fan of some of those. It's funny, in New York, there's currently, just yesterday, there was a side event from the United Nations General Assembly,
yes,
with a group called Semaphore. Seems to be a new media brand.
Yes.
You might know something about them.
Yes.
So there was a guy there who mentioned, he was one of the panelists, and he said, it's not just about what country has the highest GDP per person. It's about how we can drive costs down so that for the same GDP, you can get much more out. If you live in New York and make $200,000 and you're basically still living poor and have a bad school and have bad healthcare, is that better than living in Lagos or, and making maybe $20,000 a year, but that $20,000 a year can still get you as good a quality of life, quote unquote. And I thought that was very insightful. I think the benefits of the internet are quite clear in many cases, everything from health to education, especially when you have young population. You simply give them the access and they will educate themselves. They will take a free course online because their school is not great. They will research simple primary health care for their grandma. It's quite frankly a way to get around poor government and poor infrastructure in many cases. They will come together to try to have political action. There are any number of ways that the internet can be taken advantage of, so to speak. So I think, sort of build and they will come. That's for sure.
Interesting point. So if we look at the benefits of internet and its link to quality of life, specifically in terms of what role have you seen improved broadband access play in improving areas such as healthcare services, particularly in remote regions?
Yes, I think it's everything from the ability to the knowledge that is on the internet that you can access, to internet now equals communication, right? So if you have, in terms of calling, in terms of sending information, um, and again, to the extent that you can connect, you are more likely and willing to stay or be in a certain area of the country, um, and build a business there, or have your children go to school there. All these things, I think, how do you say it? It allows you to spread out your areas of productivity much more significantly, and reduce the amount of everybody trying to get to one or two or three places in the country, in the name of finding a means of living.
Fantastic. Keeping on that theme, are there any specific trends that you're seeing in Africa, in Nigeria, in terms of broadband infrastructure developing, or how people are finding innovative ways to increase access to internet? Is there any trends that you're seeing that you're currently excited about?
Yes, I think, coming back to the telco's dominance in providing internet, you certainly see people tethering their mobile connection to their laptop, for example. That's perhaps the number one way in which um, a student connects to the internet. But I do think we do have to talk about and say the elephant in the room. Starlink has the potential to allow for connectivity, um, ubiquitous connectivity across the country. But that's going to be through these potential partnerships with ISPs who take care of the supports and the last mile. And I think that this will be, I think, a very large opportunity. Otherwise, I don't want to be, bringing sort of negative news, but the truth is the telcos are struggling now financially. The devaluation of currencies in many African countries is making it harder and harder for them to chase the technology, because it's 3D, it's 4G, it's 5G, and all these things involve more and more spending. You're rolling out 5G when only 30% of the country has 4G, and you're doing that because equipment companies are pushing, the buying of more and more equipment. So this is no longer being sustained. But because of that, perhaps some of the ideas we're starting to throw out there will be looked at a bit more seriously, because the old way of doing things isn't as sustainable anymore.
I agree. So if we go back to Starlink, with the introduction of satellite services like Starlink, I know we've kind of slightly touched on this before, but how do you see specifically the dynamics of the ISP market shifting in Nigeria and other African countries, specifically due to the introduction of Starlink?
Yes, I think if I can use an anecdote, everyone knows the name Dangote. I think certainly in Nigeria and outside in Africa. And one of the tricks to his initial wealth, if you want to call it that, was he realized that a lot of Nigerians could not afford to buy a bag of rice, for example. So what he did was he sachetized the bag of rice. All right. So it's called the statization of the economy. And he created 500 sachets of each bag of rice. And then he sold each sachet for 10 naira. And if you add up all the sachets he made, he actually made more than the cost of the bag of rice. So ironically, poor people are kind of paying more per grain of rice. But the point is, he was able to put the rice in sachets that were affordable. And the idea is similar with what I think around Starlink. A Nigerian may not be able to afford, let's call it a bag of Starlink. But what you can do is you can put a Starlink equipment at a low-cost base station in a place that's protected. So security is taken care of, in a place that has solar power. So power is taken care of, clean power. And you put a mast up, maybe a 40-meter mast, 30-meter mast. It doesn't have to be anything too big. And then you redistribute the internet from that Starlink, $400, $500 Starlink kit to 50 to 100 people in the neighborhood, be it through a hotspot, be it through some point-to-multipoint technology. And now you have 50 to 100 people sharing one kit. And we don't need and don't expect to have 200 Mbps downlink. We're trying to get a somewhat reliable link and perhaps 10, 20 Mbps. And this is, paradigm shifting for most Africans, for most Nigerians. So it's overkill for most people to have, I have Starlink on my roof in Abuja, in Nigeria, and I'm getting 150 meg. I don't need it. I mean, I could use 20% of that and be very, very happy. So the ISP could end up being the person who sachetizes, sells to the local lawyer, the local plaza, the local school, the area of commerce there. It can be called if things aren't working and you realize there's an issue with one of the pieces of equipment, or they have a Wi-Fi problem, and so there's that sort of touch and feel. And Starlink simply provides the quote unquote backbone or the backhaul. And this is the model that I think ultimately could make a major difference. Now, if for any number of reasons this is not the model and it's just about selling Starlink kits, they will probably hit 100,000, 150,000 people, and then they will cap off. Whereas if they do this model, they could be talking about millions of customers. I hope I'm making some sense.
Oh, perfect sense. You've given great insight into how the dynamics of the ISP could change or shift in the future. So if we keep on the theme of the future, where do you see Africa's broadband, or maybe specifically Nigeria's broadband infrastructure in the next 5 years? What would it look like, or what would you hope to see?
Yeah, I will still lean on the fact that we are still the Wild West in many ways. And so there is the opportunity for the unexpected in many ways. I do think innovation, also having no choice but to find a way, all these I think will move us towards some of the thoughts I have around strengthening of ISPs. And yeah, indeed, I do think that in the next 3, 4, 5 years, this is my view. I do think you will see a lot of satellite connectivity providing backbone in Nigeria and in Africa. But there's definitely a controversy, quote unquote, around this. There are many folks who are as experienced or consider themselves even more experts than myself, who will say we need to roll out thousands and thousands of kilometers of fiber, and we need to invest in doing that. And I think it's just left to be seen what actually plays out in the next few years. I think either way, I think it'll be interesting times.
So looking closer to home, What are your goals and what will you be hopefully doing in the next 5 years to contribute to the improved internet connectivity within Nigeria, within Africa?
Yeah, I think to continue to be in a position to perhaps convince, advise, propose to the players like Starlink, Amazon Kuiper, Lightspeed, OneWeb. These are the guys more in the sort of the satellite space to become partners to local ISPs. And for us, it's a bit of it's the space I think that can keep us quite busy in the next few years. If not doing it ourselves, excuse me, then trying to be a facilitator of that for ISPs in Africa.
Fantastic. And I look forward to keeping updated on all the great work that you're doing and will continue to do.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I would say that a mantra would be a bit cliche, but certainly to believe that everyone has their own path and road, and certainly you can learn from and should learn from the past. But don't believe because you're doing something differently from everyone else that somehow there's anything wrong with that. I think especially in places like Africa, I think the more outside the box you are, perhaps the more likely you are to have a fulfilled experience. So that would be my take on it.
Brilliant. Spoken like a true innovator. I like that. You have to have that innovation mindset and think differently outside of the box. No, brilliant. I like that. As we've come to the end of today's conversation, it's been insightful. It's been a great conversation, one that I have been looking forward to. Any closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in the work that you're doing or just generally interested in broadband internet connectivity within Africa?
No, I think that's it. I will perhaps after this give you perhaps a contact way of contacting us, yes, so that to the extent you're interested in connectivity in hard to reach places anywhere in the world, and particularly in Africa, we'd love to have a conversation with you and see if there's ways in which we can collaborate.
Thank you for joining us today. You've gave a very clear, concise overview of the current state and also future direction of broadband infrastructure and connectivity in Africa. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, and for the idea of doing this and for your time.
Fantastic. We will speak soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too. All the best. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.